So think about this and imagine Hannah. Hannah cannot eat. Family's at the table, the feast is spread, everybody's there. Hannah sits there with nothing in her. She does not want to eat. And this is year after year, same table, same pain, same ache. She gets up and walks to the tabernacle in Shiloh. This is the place where Israel brings its sacrifices, where the priest brings their offerings, where the presence of God is meant to be near. She finds a corner, and what happens next is between her and the Lord. She is weeping. She is praying. Her lips are moving, but there is no sound. And Eli, the priest, there is at the doorpost watching her, and he concludes and he says, this woman must be drunk, but she is not drunk. She is making a vow. She asks God for a son. In the same breath, before she has any reason to believe he will answer, she gives that son back to him. It says, if you will give me a male child, I will give him to the Lord in all the days of his life. It says, no razor shall come upon his head. She does not have this child yet, but she is already releasing him. She's already giving him back to the Lord. And if we look over these three chapters, I'm not going to read these chapters. Obviously, this just will take too much time, but I will point you to the point where we're at, and I pray that you will understand what is going on in this story. But as we look at the whole of these three chapters, God is doing something deliberate here. He sets two households aside, one next to another, Hannah and Elkanah, a marriage held together by the steadfast love of through the years, even through the years of barrenness that Hannah had. A woman who brought her greatest pain to the Lord, and a vow that was kept, even when keeping it cost her the one thing that she waited years to receive. And on the other side, we have Eli, a priest of Israel, a man who had served in the tabernacle for decades. He knew the law. He knew the most sacred office in the Israel. That's what he had, the most sacred office in Israel at the time, whose sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were stealing from the offering, sleeping with women who served in the entrance of the tabernacle, and treating the things of God with open contempt. And Eli knew this. He heard about it from the people. He was not watching closely, at least not enough for him to know for himself. He did speak to his sons. He rebuked them, but he then did nothing. And that is the second household. And you will know that Hophni and Phinehas grew up inside the tabernacle. They handled the holy things daily. They knew the law, they knew the sacrifices, they knew the rituals, they knew all of these things. And the text says plainly that they did not know the Lord. And not because the truth was kept from them, that wasn't the case. Because the Father who held the truth never enforced it. You know, church, we have been time and time again, we have been shown through the scriptures what it is to have a faithful house, a house that is serving the Lord. This is a specific message, not only for parents, for everyone in this room, whether you're a parent or not, you are being addressed. And I want you to understand that the ultimate question here is, do you know the Lord? That is the ultimate question. That is what I want you to understand from 1 Samuel 1-3. But here in 1 Samuel 1-3, I want you to understand that God sets two households aside, side by side, to show 5 marks of a household that knows the Lord, warning that doctrine without discipline can leave children near things of God, but strangers to the Lord himself. That is my proposition. That is what I want you to get from this sermon. And I have five marks, 5 points. It's dedication, devotion, discipline, doctrine, discipline, and decrease. And we'll get into them. So let's talk about dedication. This is what I want. This is what I want to share with you guys. A household that knows the Lord gives its children to God before it even raises them, and keeps that gift even when keeping it costs something real. Let's look at verse 11. Verse 11. Hannah is still barren. She has no child, no promise, no sign that God even answers or hears her prayers. And in the middle of the weeping, she opens her mouth and she makes a vow. It says, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look at my affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give your servant a male child, then I will give to him the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head." Now, read carefully. She is not bargaining. She is not telling God, if you do this, then I will do that. It seems like that when you read it, but what she actually is doing is she's saying, you know what, I already know that if you give me this child, I'm going to give him back because he doesn't belong to me. She believes that the child given by God belongs to God. Notice the Nazirite vow tucked into this prayer. No razor shall touch his head. This is total consecration. This is total devotion to the Lord from birth to death. Hannah is not simply asking for a son. She already has decided who the son is for before he even exists, before she has held him in his arms, before she has even named him. She has already given him back. That is what you could say a theology of children. It's her theology on what she believes, what God is doing through the child that the Lord can give her. And it was settled before she had even conceived. And this matters more than parents realize, because your theology of your children will govern every decision that you make from the delivery, that day, from delivery room forward. If you believe your child belongs to you, you will parent out of ownership. You will make decisions that are based on what you want for the child, what reflects well on you, what keeps the child close to you, what protects you, and what feels that is yours. And when that child begins to follow God in a direction that you did not plan, when he needs for you to release him, you're going to want to control. You will resist it because releasing feels like losing something that was yours to keep. But if you believe your child belongs to God, you will parent out of stewardship. You will hold the child, you could say, with the open hands, not because you love him less, because you know whose he actually is. And this decision that Hannah made in verse 11 was not made at Shiloh on the day that she brought Samuel there. It was made in her heart before she even again held him. And it made everything from there possible. Now look at what happens when Hannah's theology meets its hardest test. Chapter 1, verses 24 to 28. We know that Samuel is weaned. He is young, perhaps he is 3 or 4 years old, and Hannah brings him to Shiloh. She does not come empty-handed. She brings 3 bulls It says, ephah of flour, a skin of wine. She brings the child to Eli, and he speaks to him plainly and says, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted my petition and I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord, and as long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." She lent him to the Lord, and she meant it. She walks out of Shiloh without her son. The text does not record that this was the easy thing to do. It does not try to soften the cost that she had made. It just simply records that she did it because she said she would. And because she meant what she said, who Samuel was for. And that is what keeping a vow looks like, when keeping it costs you something real. Now, some of you have made that vow over your child. Maybe not in those exact words. Maybe it was last week, dedication service here at church. Maybe it was at the hospital. Maybe it was a quiet moment right before birth, and you told the Lord you wanted to raise your child for him. And it wasn't hard to say at that moment. The child was small. The future it's abstract. You can't even see it. And truly, the cost is invisible. And Hannah's vow was tested in chapter 1, verse 24, when she had to walk to Shiloh. And she had this 3-year-old boy, and she had to walk back without him. She passed the test because, again, her theology was already placed. She already knew what the Lord desired in her before she even arrived. And that vow gets tested the same way in your household. You could even say every day. When your child walks with God and he goes somewhere that you did not plan. When keeping your word means letting go of something that you could say you're gripping on tightly. When faithfulness to God requires something of your child that costs your comfort, your reputation, and your control. The question dedication asks every parent in this room is simple. Do you actually believe that your child belongs to God? And is your parenting showing it? That is the question regarding dedication. But Hannah's dedication to the Lord did not end her relationship with her son. Giving Samuel to God did not mean walking away from Samuel. And that leads us to the second mark of a household that knows the Lord. And that is devotion. A second point is devotion. A household that knows the Lord stays present in marriage and in parenting and never lets distance or secondhand reports take the place of being there. This mark moves two directions. First, towards the spouse, and then towards the child. Go back to chapter 1, verse 5 and 8. Elkanah and Hannah have been living with this barrenness for years. We know that Peninnah had children, Hannah did not, and every year of the feast, Peninnah makes sure Hannah feels the weight of that. That text says Hannah wept and she would not eat. This is not a quiet sadness. There was outright open annual grief in front of the whole family. And Elkanah stays. Verse 5 says that he loved Hannah. He gave her a double portion because he loved her. And verse 8, he speaks to her directly and says, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart grieved? Am I not better than am I not better to you than 10 sons? Man, I mean, you could probably say this question was clumsy, but this is a husband that is refusing to let his wife's pain become a wall between them. He doesn't just minimize what she is going through. He knows he cannot fix that. He knows he won't, he cannot. What he does, though, is stay present at her side during this grief. He stays attentive, speaking directly to her rather than waiting for her to come around on her own. And this, men, this is where parenting begins. Not necessarily, not with the child, but with the marriage. Church, listen carefully. The marriage is the soil which your children grow. That is, I mean, I cannot overemphasize that truth. What your children absorb first is not what you necessarily teach them directly. It is what they watch between you and your spouse. They're watching whether their father stays engaged when things get hard or he withdraws when things get uncomfortable. They're watching whether their mother is it safe to speak to the mom? They are watching whether this covenant between these two hold under pressure, even through arguments, even through fights, or this is just, it's a function, whether it's only good for the moment. Elkanah's steadiness towards Hannah through the years of barrenness was not just being a good husband. He was laying a foundation that the household stood on. A marriage that will not hold under pressure will not produce the kind of parenting that the presence of children that children need. You cannot give your children what your marriage is not producing. And now look to the second direction and toward the child. Children, chapter 2, verse 19, it says, and his mother used to make him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Every year, the same journey, the same robe, year after year. Hannah could not be with Samuel daily. We know that the distance was real. She had made a vow and she kept it, which meant Samuel lived at this tabernacle while Hannah had to go home. When she found the form of presence available to her, she gave without fail. A robe made by her own hands, carried from home to Shiloh year after year. She could not tuck her little boy in. She could not hear how his day was every day. She could not be in the room when he needed her in the middle of the night. But she could make a robe and she could bring it to him, as she did every year, without exception. Church, this is devoted parenting. It's not perfect in presence, which none ultimately can give. But we need to be persistent. We need to be resourceful. We need to be unwilling to disappear with our involvement. We need to make sure that we're there as much as we can. And this form of Hannah's presence changed as Samuel grew and as distance demanded. What never changed was her orientation towards him. Now look at Eli, chapter 2, verse 22 and 23. It says, now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to Israel, to all of Israel, and how they laid with women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he said to them, why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all these people. I hear of your evil dealings from all these people. Eli learned from his sons were doing through the community, not from his own eyes, not from himself being attentive to his own sons. He was at the tabernacle. His sons were also at the tabernacle. And still this information about what their sons were actually doing came to him secondhand. It was hearsay. It was carried by complaints of ordinary Israelites who had witnessed what these two young men were doing. And this is what happens when parenting stops watching. When a parent arranges a life in such a way that the knowledge of their own children, their own children's character and conduct becomes a report rather than a relationship. Eli was not far from his son in miles. He was just far from being attentive. And the distance cost him everything. Let me ask you something directly this morning. When was the last time you learned something significant about your children's heart? And not because you asked. And not because you were watching them closely to notice. But because someone else told you first. Maybe a teacher, maybe another parent, a church leader, someone who knew your child's inner life better than you did because they were paying attention more than you were. That is one of the hardest things when it comes to parenting, hearing stories or about your own children, what they're doing or they're not doing. It is tough. You don't want to hear about your own children, not only because it hurts because of them, but it's ultimately sometimes you feel it's a reflection of your own, of what you're doing or not doing. And it's a difficult thing to hear. But that is sometimes true. That is what needs to happen sometimes. But here, Eli's failure is showing up in just a regular modern household. Parenting by second hand is so common these days. Present in the house, but absent from the actual life of the child. And here is why it happens. Because presence takes time. And not just quality time. Okay, it's not just quality time, it's quantity time. And this is what I want you to hear plainly and pay attention. There is a phrase that has done real damage in this generation of parenting, and that is, I need to spend quality time with my children. That idea it's almost like you're focused, like you can substitute certain amount of time, and you're saying to them, look, I'm just gonna, these 20 minutes that I have to be quality time. But the truth is that is not gonna happen. A child does not open their hearts on a timer. The conversations that actually matter, the questions asked while doing even dishes together, the confessions that come late nights after a hard day of work, the long car ride when nothing was planned and everything God said. They do not arrive on schedule. They arrive because it was quantity. You just had quantity time with this child. And inside this ordinary hours of parenting, it's already there. It's already present. It's already available when the moment comes without announcing itself. And remember, quantity time is not opposed to quality time. You might hang out with your children for 3 hours and nothing will be said, nothing necessarily of importance. But then you hang out with them another 3 hours, and then half of the time they speak to you about things that matter, that things that are going on in their heart. Because you know why? Because they know that you're spending time with them. Because they understand that it's not just, oh, you want to tell them what the Bible says? Every time we hang out, that's all you want to do is tell me how I'm doing this and wrong. And no, I want to know about your life. I want to know what's going on. Tell me all your joys. And through those joys, I also want to know what's going on in your heart. What's hurting? Or what are your thoughts? Eli here had decades of proximity to his sons. He served again in the same tabernacle. He lived on the same grounds. And still the knowledge of their sin reached him through strangers before it reached him his own attention. Proximity without attentiveness is not presence. It's just living in the same building. And Hannah made one robe a year and carried it on the long journey, and she could not live with. She knew her son better than Eli knew his sons that he saw every day. Devoted parenting towards your spouse and towards your child is the second mark of a household that knows the Lord. But now as we look at what Eli's household actually produced, we have seen what his lack of presence and being attentive looked like from the outside. Now the text shows us what has produced on the inside. And this is where the warning of 1 Samuel 1-3 gets greater and sharper. Third point is doctrine. A household that knows the Lord will not let a child mistake nearness to holy things for the knowledge of the Holy One. But we know that those that have sat closest to the truth their whole lives can never once be searched by that very truth. It is not necessary just because you come to church every Sunday morning or every Wednesday night that you know the Lord. Chapter 2, verse 12 says, "Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord." We stop there, and the narrator here, the one writing this, is not giving you a character assessment. He is already giving you the verdict, the theological verdict. Hophni and Phinehas did not know the Lord. And he has placed that verdict from the very beginning before he has said anything about these men. Before he describes even a single sin. Before the stolen meat, before the women in the entrance, before the confrontation with their father, the first thing this person, the narrator, wants you to know about Eli's son is that they did not know the Lord. They were not believers. Now, think about these men again, the way they grew up. They were exactly where they needed to be. They're among believers, among Israel. They were born into a priestly household. They watched their father perform these rituals every year, every day. They worshiped the God of Israel. They handled the offerings. They knew the law. They served the most sacred space in Israel at that time. And proximity to holy things did not produce knowledge of God. Hophni and Phinehas should not have been, if they had these men, potentially you would think these guys must be the most godliest men in the nation. But they were not. They were worthless men that did not know the Lord. Here's what the text is pressing you to see. This is what you to pay attention. A child can grow up in the most faithful Christian home. He can hear the gospel preached every day. He can memorize scripture, pray at the dinner table, sit through service quietly, paying attention, go to camp, answer every question the right way, and still not know the Lord. And again, not because the truth was kept from him, and not because the environment failed him, but because the knowledge of the Lord is something a household is not something a household can produce in a child. It is something that only God does in the soul of a child. And there is no parent on earth can do it for him. Now look at chapter 3, verse 7. Now Samuel did not know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Now, it is not saying what it might first appear to say, that Samuel is being placed in the same category as Hophni and Phinehas. The narrator adds a second clause immediately. What does he say? The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Samuel had not yet received a direct prophetic word from the Lord. This is what this verse means. He had been raised faithfully. Chapter 2, verse 26 says he grew in favor with both God and man, but even Samuel, raised under Hannah's vow, shaped by her yearly presence to him, serving the Lord from childhood, still needed God himself to call him directly. Hannah's faithfulness prepared him for that moment. It was not a substitute for it. And this is the distinction the text is making for every parent in this room. What faithful parenting does, it gives a child preparation. You are preparing, you're toiling the soil. You are planting the seed, you're watering the seed, but you cannot make it grow. God is the one that gives the increase. Only God can open the heart. Only God takes that child and raised near the truth and brings him from nearness into actual knowledge of God himself. This should drive parents to prayer, not despair. Hannah kept returning to Shiloh year after year, trusting that God who opened the womb could also open the heart of his or her son. And he did. But the opening was ultimately, and we know, God's act, and it wasn't hers. And I want to speak directly to someone in this room. It may not be a parent that I'm talking to right now, but some of you grew up in a Christian home. You have church your whole life. You know how the service runs. You know when to stand up, when to sit down. You know the songs, you know the Bible stories, you know the right answers to all the questions. People might watch you from the outside and, man, this guy seems he's ready to go, he's fine. And that being raised the way you were has done its work. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it rather than just to answer quickly. Do you actually know the Lord? Not do you know about him? Not do you know correct theology, but do you know him? Has he spoken to you the way God spoke to Samuel by name that very night? That his word had done something in you that you or no one else could have manufactured on your own? Have you been searched by that very truth as you sit here? And you have sat here for most of your life. Proximity will never be the same as knowledge. Just because you have grown up in a religious environment, it's not the same as being regenerate. Being raised by faithful parents is not the same as being born again yourself. And if you have been coasting on the faith of your household rather than reckoning with the Lord himself, this text is warning and is aimed directly at you this morning. The new birth is not inherited. It cannot be passed down through a godly bloodline, you could say, or it's not absorbed through church attendance. It is only given by God to those he calls and his time. And when that call comes, it does require a personal answer. And as Samuel had to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears." Your parents cannot say that for you. Their prayers have been going up for you for years. And that answer to the prayers requires only something that some of you in this room can give. And if you're here in this morning and you don't know the Lord, despite growing up near him, I'm asking you to come to him today. Not to your parents' faith, not a church membership card. You need to come to him. Because he's calling you, and you need to answer. And for the parents in this room, what does this mean? What this means to you is not that your faithfulness is pointless. Hannah's faithfulness was not pointless. What it means is that your parenting must be accompanied by what you cannot do on your own strength. We need to pray for our child's regeneration the way a person prays who knows that only God can give it. We need to teach the truth every day. We need to model the faith. We need to build this house. And then get on your knees and ask the Lord to do what no parent on earth can do for their child. A household that knows the Lord cannot and does not mistake a godly environment for the new birth. It teaches the truth, it stays faithful, and asks God to do what God can. But now the text continues and even asks a harder question. If proximity to holy things does not save the child, how did Hophni and Phinehas get where they were, and how did they end up there? What happened inside Eli's household that turned these two sons that he raised in the tabernacle near the Lord And now the Lord calls them worthless. And the answer runs straight through their father. And it is the greatest and sharpest warning that this text carries for every parent in this house. This point is my most important point, so pay attention. I see the little kids in this house, in this church. I see the older ones. I see my own life. I see what I fall short on. This point is what everybody needs to pay attention to, because it not only applies to children, but it applies to every single person in this room. Discipline. A household that knows the Lord restrains sin out of love, because words that carry no consequences teach a child that God's words carry none either. Go back to chapter 2, verse 23 and 25. Eli has heard these reports. He knows that Hophni and Phinehas are doing at the tabernacle. And he says, why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealing from all these people. No, my sons, it is not a good report that I hear the people of the Lord spreading abroad. If someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? This is a genuine rebuke. Eli names the sin. He draws it out. And he says, this is the gravity of the sin. And he tells his son not only what they're doing wrong, but why is it dangerous? Because when a man sins against the Lord, there is no mediator step on his behalf. And that are serious words spoken by a man who clearly understands the weight of what's happening in his house. But you know what he does? He walks away. He doesn't remove them from priestly office. There's no enforcement of any consequences. There's no actual authority, the actual authority that God has given to him as a high priest of Israel, that he has to remove his sons from the duties that they were defiling. He spoke, but he walked away. And his sons continued doing exactly what they were doing before he had opened his mouth. And now look at chapter 3, verse 13. This is not Eli speaking anymore. This is God speaking through Samuel, rendering his verdict on Eli's household. I will judge his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. He did not restrain them. This Hebrew word, restrain, kala, it means to forcibly hold back, to physically stop them from doing something. It is not the word of just being, verbal disapproval. It's not a word expressing disappointment. It is the word for actually intervening. He's using this power, the power that he has, to bring something to a complete halt. Eli had that power. He was the high priest. He had full authority to remove Hophni and Phinehas from their priestly duties, to enforce real consequences of what they were doing. He had the word. He had an office. He used the word, but he did not use his office. And God names that as sin. Not the sin of these wicked sons alone, but the father's failure to restrain. Eli rebuked Hophni and Phinehas with his mouth, but he never enforced it. And you know what happens when when you don't enforce the word? At first it confuses the child. But then they draw a conclusion, the only conclusion available to them, that the God's words claim to be present must carry no more weight than whatever the Father speaks, and however he makes them stick. And the Lord himself does not let that matter rest with his sons alone. He doesn't say, your sons are the wicked ones, I'm going to deal with them. He charges the Father with their iniquity. For the restraint he had the power to use, he would not. There are fathers in this room this morning who know exactly what that practice looks like. You have spoken correction to your child dozens of times. You have said it as clear as possible. You have said it firmly, and nothing changes. Because your child has already learned something about your very words. He has learned that they do not lead anywhere. He has learned that the rebuke comes and then life continues as it was. And that line you drew, it's not really a line actually. And the consequences you named it, they're not actually coming. And so the words, however serious they sound at that time, when you said to them, just carry no weight in the child's mind, because the words without enforcement are not discipline. They're just noise that just got to sit for a little bit, and then the noise will fall away, and we're back to where we were before. This is the first thing you must understand about Eli's failure, how actually it was. It was not a failure of love. We knew that Eli loved his children, his sons. It was not a failure of knowledge. Eli knew the law. It was a failure of will, of action. He knew what was right and he would not do it. He chose the path of least resistance. And he did it again and again until his sons were too far gone for anything short of divine judgment to reach them. Though this text warns regarding passivity, it doesn't teach harshness. The discipline it calls for restraint is exercised in love, aimed at the good of the child, not control that manages your anxiety, not some enforcement driven by anger or you're wounded because your child didn't listen to you and this is pride coming out. Eli's error was passive at the passive end of the spectrum, but there's an opposite end that is equally as destructive. And that's what separates faithful discipline from the failure, and that's the motive. Eli chose his comfort over his son's good. But a harsh parent chooses his emotional relief over the child's good. Neither one is parenting truly out of love. The mark of a household that knows the Lord is disciplined, aimed at the child, not at the parent's feelings. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but so why does a father do what Eli did? Because enforcing it does cost something. Confrontation is not easy. It costs relationship, at least in the short term. You know that you're going to rock the boat when you confront your son and daughter. And it's not a fun thing to do. And a father who wants to be more liked, that he wants to be faithful, will choose the comfort of present relationship over the good of his child's soul. every single time. But we must even go deeper, because the real question is not why a parent avoids confrontation. The real question is what he loves most at the moment. And this is where Eli's failure stopped being a parenting problem. It ends up being a worship problem. Eli loved being undisturbed more than his love for his sons knowing the Lord. He loved his own peace more than he loved their own good. He loved the version of his own house that did not require to do the hard things. And he chose that over and over again over his sons, year after year, until God's patience with that house ran out entirely. A parent who will not discipline is not only simply failing his own son or his own child. What he's doing is actually revealing what he loves the most. And this revelation should drive every parent in this church to examine himself, him or herself, not just in his parenting, in their heart. Now, here's where this crosses into something that every one of us must reckon with, whether you're a parent or you're not a parent. Because the only parent who can discipline out of genuine love for a child's soul, rather than out of anger or just comfort seeking, is a parent who has asked himself that he has been giving that receiving end of that type of discipline himself. A parent who knows what it is to be corrected by God himself, to face the real consequences of your own very sin, to have a Heavenly Father who loved him enough to not let sin go unaddressed, who has received that correction not as condemnation, but as proof that the Father cares. Hebrews 12:6 says, "The Lord disciplines those he loves and chastises every son whom he receives." The Father did not discipline us from a distance with words that carried no consequence. He disciplined sin fully and finally. And he did it through his own son at the cost of his own son. Romans 8:32. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. The restraint Eli withheld from his son, God did not withhold. He restrained sin at the cross completely, a price no human father has ever has been asked to pay. Every parent in this room who has received that type of discipline, who came to God knowing that they deserve judgment and found instead forgiveness. And that person carries something into their parenting that no parenting technique can ever supply. You know what it is to be disciplined in love. You know what it felt when God did not look away from your sin, but he dealt with it. And he is now dealing with it. And he did not destroy you, but he restored you. That is the discipline that we have been called to extend to our very children. Not harshness, not passivity. And it's costly. It's love-driven. It is consequence enforcing. It is unwilling to look away from discipline as a parent who received exactly what God did and knows what it is worth. So a household that knows the Lord does not speak correction and just walk away. It restores with one hand and holds the line with the other, because God himself, the way he asked us to do it, the way we worship him, and the way he did it on the cross, he did it for every one of us. So we have dedication, we have devotion, doctrine, and discipline. These four marks of a household that knows the Lord. And if you have been listening this morning, you have noticed that every one of them has been aimed at building something into a child's life from the very beginning. It is understanding what your theology is from the beginning. You're understanding that your child is the Lord's. That the child will grow up knowing the Lord himself. And this is where the fifth mark lands. This is where I want you to understand. This is where all four of those things do their work. Something begins to happen in a child's life when they parent the right way, when he is ready. The child starts to grow up. He owns his own walk, begins to shape. And when it does, a parent faces the hardest release of all. This is my fifth point. It's decrease. A household that knows the Lord releases control of his own child, his own walk with God, as his own walk with God grows, trading the obedience that ends for honor that does not. So chapter 3, verse 15 to 18. Samuel had just spent that night receiving a direct word from the Lord, a word of judgment against Eli's own house. The angel did not appear to Eli. The word did not come to Eli. It came to a boy sleeping in the tabernacle, the boy that he had been responsible to train, the boy that until that very night had been under Eli's authority and instruction. And so now we have Samuel laying down in that very morning, and the text says that he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and he was afraid, and he did not want to tell Eli what God had said. Then Eli calls him, says, "Samuel, my son." And Samuel answers, "Here I am." Eli speaks directly, says, What was told to you? Do not hide it from me. Says, God do so to you and more. Also, if you hide anything from me and all that he had told you. And Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. This relationship, this dynamic between these two men has fundamentally changed overnight. Samuel now holds a prophetic word that carries more weight than any authority, anything that Eli had ever spoken to him. The Lord called Samuel, not Eli. The word came to Samuel, not Eli. And now Samuel is moving from the authority of Eli to the authority of being a prophet under God's own authority. And this is an office that Eli could not touch. He was no longer just a child in a house. And this is where I'm going. And then Eli goes and tells him something. He says, I need you to tell me what's going on. He says, listen, I don't need to listen to you anymore, old man. I'm a prophet. I only listen to my father. He doesn't say that. He doesn't change his ways. He answers Eli's questions fully and hides nothing. You know what this is called? This is called honor. It's not obedience. It's called honor. And that's the difference between what matters most in parents, what parents haven't been told. Listen, this is one of the greatest truths that I have in my parenting time since, my son is 21 years old. This truth that I'm going to share with you is something that I've learned when he was about 15. And it was like, taught to me by, well, not personally, but at Great Grace by Chris Hamilton. It just blew my mind. And I'm going to ask you a question. The question is, when, and everybody will give me a different answer. If I were to ask you, when are your kids not required to obey you? This is the way he started the actual study. When are your kids not required to obey you? Some would say 18, some would say 21, some would say, you know what, well, it depends. Some say when they leave the house. I mean, it's just somebody, just people would say different things. And this is where he just started expanding on this, and it just really blessed me. But Ephesians chapter 6, Paul writes two commands in two consecutive verses, and he uses them two different words on purpose. He says, verse 1, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And the verse 2 says, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. Obey, then honor. Two different commands, two different words, two different seasons. Obedience belongs to a child in a household, and it is tied to a stage of life. And this is where I want you to keep in mind, church. We confuse obedience with honor. There is a time in your life where you must obey your parents. That is your calling. That is like the greatest thing you have to do. What you need to do today, if you're a child and you live in the house, you must obey your parents. But when Christ was teaching the adults, he didn't say obey your parents. It says, the fifth commandment says, honor your parents. This honor it doesn't expire. You can honor your child, you can honor your father when you're 5, you can honor your father when you're 50. And you must do that. And you must understand what the difference is. I tell my son, I tell my children, you don't need to obey me. I pray that you heed my counsel, but you don't need to obey me, even under my own household. But you will honor me. You will honor me. If you dishonor my house, if you not dishonor my name, if you dishonor, you'll be out of here. You're done. We need to get to a point where we tell our children, when it comes to discipline, even going back to the last point, we say to them, listen, if you are going to dishonor this home, I will do what 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 5 says. I will deliver you myself. I have decided to deliver you to Satan. Can you, as a parent, say that to your child? I will deliver you to Satan myself, that he will take, and he will have to deal with you. And why? Because that is what is needed for his own salvation. Can you truly say that to your own child? And again, that's something that all of you with little babies running around, it's really difficult to even consider. But can you say that? Honor is a permanent shape. You need to teach your children how to honor. They must obey in a certain time, but they need to honor you forever until the day you're 6 feet under. That's just the way you need to teach, and you need to know the difference. Now, I only say that I wanted these 5 points could be a study in on themselves, how to deal with it practically, and so many question and answer questions that you might have, because there's everybody has different children, their own personalities, and how do you deal with it? Because you have 3 children, and one is an easy one, there's a hard one, and there's just so many different type of personalities running around, and you're like, how am I supposed to deal with these type of children? Listen, it's not an easy thing, but what we need to do is continue to search, continue to learn, continue to ask questions. We cannot sit idly by and say, you know what, the Lord will take care of that. I'll just bring them to church. No, that's your greatest disciples must be your children. And again, the reason why this is called decrease is because ultimately, as your child grows in the walk with the Lord, you must, and I got this from John chapter 3, verse 30, where he says, I must decrease and he will increase. And so at the end, when John the Baptist says he must increase, but I must decrease, this is the way the relationship between you and your child should be. As he grows in the Lord, I must decrease and the Lord must increase, and I'm going to leave him to the Lord. That is a difficult thing to do if you have not practiced that, even when your child is 3 or 4 or 5. When he falls and you just can't help but run to him, but you know he's not even crying. You just got to go take care of him. When a little kid, when you understand that you need to let him go through his own little trials, when he's 5 years old, you need to make him uncomfortable. You got to allow things to be uncomfortable, and you need to step back and see what he's going to do. Let him learn. And then when you just little by little, you do those things when he's 18, 20, 25, this man or this young lady is able to thrive in the world, not because of what you did, because what the Lord has already done in them. And this is not a sad story. This is not the ending of the story. This is the whole point of the story. That as a child grows up to know the Lord, not just knowing about him and not just being near him, but actually knowing who he is. And that is the answer for every parent in this room, every faithful parent that has ever prayed over their child while they were sleeping or not. When you decrease is not it's not a failure. It's basically dedication arriving at its destination. So we have these 5 marks: dedication, devotion, doctrine, discipline, and decrease. These households set side by side in 1 Samuel 1-3, and is shaped by mother's open hand and steady love, one shaped by father's feeble words and the fathers that did not restrain that sin. And in that space, we still have to ask the question, do you know the Lord? That is the ultimate question. That is the final question. And that doesn't matter everything. Listen, we preach here over and over again, and you don't remember most of the things we preach. But we all, at the end of the day, that's the ultimate question. Do you know the Lord? Do you have a desire to be well-pleasing in his eyes? So with that being said, church, I just pray that you will answer the call. The children in this room, the children that hear me, that they will say, when the Lord has called you, because the Lord has called you already, that you answer the way Samuel did, and he says, speak, Lord, your servant hears. You need to be able to say that. Don't leave the same way that you came in. God is not far. He is here. He was never far from you. You just need to call upon him. He is calling you today.